For you?
Growing a mustache, I see.
It's November. Gotta keep the spirit, you know?
I suppose that's a thing that people do, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of us over here. There's like 20 people at SurveyMonkey doing it, so.
Oh boy, yeah.
Great. Well, I think I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself for those listening in. I'm going to mute myself after I start and make sure all of our listeners are able to get in. But for those of you already here who have already joined us, you know why we're here. We're here to talk to Scholar alumni about Silicon Valley or not. Why is moving to Silicon Valley right for you? So I'll let each of our participants let us know their background, their Penn State story, and how they got to where they are today, wherever that is. And David Hua was going to join us, but he can't. He has another obligation that he just couldn't pass up at the last moment. And he has let us know if you're interested in talking to Hua about his business, you can check out his LinkedIn stuff on our page, that you can email him. So if you're interested, email us at scholaralumni@psu.edu. We'll get you in touch with Hua. But with that, I think I'm going to start with Ariana. I'll go from left to right across our entrepreneur panel. We may see a few more people log in, but Ariana, please kick us off.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Ariana Simpson. I graduated from Penn State in 2012. It didn't really occur to me when I was finishing up school that I should get a job. So what that ended up was it ended up being a very interesting series of events, whereby I ended up starting a company with two other Penn State students. And we were accepted to an accelerator, went through that in Princeton, and we were basically working on a software as a service platform that helped companies acquire new customers and engage with their current customers, basically by providing rewards for actions that they wanted to incentivize. And we worked on that for a while, it ended up not going too far. I think part of that was also due to the fact that we weren't in Silicon Valley. So I ended up deciding to stay in tech. Went to Facebook, went to another startup first, YC startup called Shoptiques, basically a boutique shopping platform based in New York City. I then spent a few months traveling, came back to New York, worked at Facebook for a while, and then finally made the move out to San Francisco in July to join BitGo, which is a Bitcoin security company. And yeah, Bitcoin is obviously a really, really exciting space. There's a lot going on in terms of startups in this industry right now. So most of that innovation is happening out here in San Francisco in the Valley. So yeah, it's a great time to be out here.
Thank you, Ariana. We'll go ahead with Drew. Drew, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got there?
Sure thing. So I was also a 2012 grad at Penn State. I am originally from the Philadelphia area, was in the business school at Penn State, studied accounting and economics, and then was kind of on the accounting track, but got plugged in with InnoBlue and fell in love with this startup environment and the concept of trying to build something from the ground up. So after graduating, I actually decided to go into consulting for a little while, and I worked for Accenture based out of the Philadelphia office. So I stayed there for about 15 months before I decided that I was ready to move out west. And so prior to coming out to San Francisco, I took a few months off to travel and did some self-study with teamtreehouse.com, just teaching myself some basic front-end web design skills, and then moved out here. And then once I landed in January, it was kind of just building relationships and meeting people in the Valley, and ended up deciding to work for SurveyMonkey, which is where I'm at now. So I started here in April, and I work in what's called product operations, which is kind of a cross-functional role in between the engineering team and the business organization, where I help us prioritize what features we should build into the product. So that's where I'm at now. Happy to answer any questions about that whole path. And as background, I'm constantly interested in the tech space and starting my own initiatives. So that's something that is pretty easy to do out here, just because of the community. So that's my intro.
Thanks so much, Drew. I guess I'll pop back on now that I'm done making sure all of our students are logged in. Jamie, you are our counter narrative today, so putting you on the spot and asking for your intro and why you aren't in Silicon Valley and what your background looks like.
Hi, can you hear me? Yep. I'm Jamie Goldberg, and my company is Silverline Global Inc. We're a video technology network in the endurance sports space, like running, triathlon, cycling, and adventure events, like the Tough Mudders of the world. My background is investment banking and institutional investment, and I worked on Wall Street and investment banking for about 20 years. So I graduated a long time ago, and I left that industry because I saw the opportunity. I'm also an athlete, and I competed in triathlons since 2000. I've done pretty serious competition in the age group, nothing professional, but realized through my participation that there was no technology in this industry, a huge learning curve and resource curve in sports, and recognized that there was an opportunity to structurally change the industry on a global scale using digital video. So I, through people with whom I met in the sport and who also happened to be Penn State alum, started Silverline, and we began in February 2012, and since then we have built our network in the US and UK and are expanding globally, and our clients are events like the Marine Corps Marathon, the Pittsburgh Marathon, the Tour of Britain, and we enable them with our video network to add new revenue streams from sponsorship and advertising and content. So we are located in Philadelphia, and it's, I think, more important than like saying that I have a counter as to why not be Silicon Valley, because I think that there are some real advantages of being at ground zero for technology. I just have some views that I'm looking forward to sharing with the group about balancing the decision and other considerations that I think are important. I'm here in Philadelphia because I have an established family and career and all, and friends and everything's here. So it wasn't really realistic for me to move. But I have some thoughts about that that aren't counter, just other considerations that I'm looking forward to sharing.
Thank you, Jamie. And Roger, do you want to share a little bit with the group? We'll make sure that your microphone works.
Sure, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I am a 2012 Penn State grad. I was actually majoring in journalism, so not the most tech-related space, but I was really focused into getting more into that. After graduation, I moved back home to San Francisco. I'm actually from here originally. And I had no intention of working for a startup. My parents worked for startups my whole life, so that was not what I saw myself doing. But I found it, it's not easy to break into sports journalism, so I ended up writing and doing editing for another startup in the real estate space, through which I found the sports opportunity with a growing startup. And, despite my misgivings about the space initially, I decided to give it a shot and really hit it off. The startup is called Chat Sports. It's a mobile-oriented sports news platform, and I get to write, edit, market, do social media. It's a very, very cool opportunity for someone who's looking to learn more about startups, more about how businesses work, and that's where I'm at now.
Great, thank you very much. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the questions that were sort of predetermined. I'll have each of you take a shot at each of them. That's okay. And we don't have to go in the same order, so I'll let you guys sort of raise your hand and we'll go in the order you'd like. So the first one is just, What does Silicon Valley, and I always say wrong, but Silicon Valley offer for an entrepreneur? And Jamie, maybe what do other locations offer equally so, or however you'd like to answer that question. That first.
Pardon me?
Who'd like to take a crack at what does Silicon Valley offer for an entrepreneur, or your version of that question, Jamie?
Oh, my version of the question is really concise. I think it matters to locate not just in Silicon Valley because of technology. It matters the industry that you're in. And if you're in the healthcare industry and you have a tech startup in healthcare, then being in the Pennsylvania area is a great place. If you have a media startup, then being in New York City is a great place. But it isn't just the tech that's important. It's the industry that you're working within. Since my business is media-centric, we find ourselves traveling all the time for clients, investors, connections to New York City because it's so media-heavy.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Who's up next?
I'll jump in. So I think that one of the big advantages of being out here is really the people. I find that one thing that's really interesting about this area is that that I haven't seen, for example, when I was living in New York and still working in the startup tech community. You end up seeing that your social circle and your professional circle really overlap. So I think that can be both good and bad in terms of how you manage it. It's great in the sense that, you can be out for drinks with a friend and, they're like, oh, I'm bringing a few friends over. And then it turns out that those friends are actually very successful entrepreneurs, investors, etc., which is awesome in the sense that, if you're looking to raise money or, make connections for possible deals or partnerships, that's great because these things have a tendency to kind of fall into your lap out here in a way that they might not in other places. At the same time, there are also other constraints, I think, that are related to the same issues of people in the sense that, if you are the founder of an early stage startup and you're trying to hire people, in some sense, that's going to be a lot harder because there's a lot of competition for talent. So, it's awesome that you have all these really smart, talented people out here, and that I think drives a lot of really interesting conversations and innovation. But it can also be a constraint in the sense that, you're fighting with other startups for the same limited pool of talent, particularly when you're looking at, say, hiring engineers. So I think, people is definitely one of the Valley's strongest draws and benefits, but it can also be a challenge in certain contexts.
Great, thank you. Drew or Roger?
Sure. So I totally agree with that. I think that it can be tough sometimes when you're dealing with that much competition for roles, for investments, all that. But really, that volume of startups, the number of people or companies out here in every different space, it does play into your favor. Everyone knows someone who can help you. If you're good with networking, you can find opportunities, the access points to get the resources you need to, whether it's raise money or get the word out, whatever it is. The opportunities are here. And I'm not sure if elsewhere that huge volume of people, of resources existed in the same way. That's one thing that I found is really, really helpful living out in Silicon Valley, being an entrepreneur.
All right, I guess my turn. So I'm hearing some echo. Anyways, so I moved to Philadelphia immediately after school. I would say the biggest thing is also relationships. So in Philadelphia, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's really hard to find people who are interested in startups tech. At least it was for me. Granted, I was on the road a lot. I was working in consulting, so I was traveling. And when I was in the Philly area, I was living outside of the city, so it made it very hard to be present for events that were going on and kind of meet people in the city, also working in tech. But one of the reasons I really wanted to move out to San Francisco was to surround myself with the tech and startup community and learn through osmosis. And so 10% of people in the Bay Area work in tech. And it doesn't sound like a huge percentage, but when you're walking down the street, you realize 1 out of every 10 people you walk by has the same professional passions and interests as you do. It's pretty astounding. And kind of to echo Ariana's point, like even socially when you're going out to parties or events, it's just very easy to meet people from all these different companies and learn in an accelerated format. So I think that's the big thing for someone who's early in their career. Just moving out here surrounds you with an environment that can expedite your learning. As far as actually starting a company goes, you can do that anywhere. Similar to Jamie's point, like it really does matter about what industry you're going after, where your roots are, and where your support network is. When I moved out here, I had the benefit of already having 10 or 15 friends from my time at Penn State who were out here working in the tech industry, and so that made it a pretty easy transition for me because I was able to capitalize on those networks that they were already tapped into to build my own network out here. But that definitely is a consideration. And you can be successful anywhere you go, but yeah, I think it's just a lot more present in the Bay Area. The opportunities are. So.
Great. Thank you, Drew. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is what makes an entrepreneur ready to utilize Silicon Valley's resources upon arrival. And I'll let Jamie answer that however she'd like as well. So what makes somebody ready to harness all those resources that you guys were talking about as soon as they get to the Bay Area?
I'll go if no one else wants to take it. For me, it's a healthy dose of realism. I mean, your project is maybe not going to take off instantly. People are not going to throw money at you. But if you have a good knowledge of what you want to do and how you need to get there, you know, the resources are there. The connections exist. So it's really all about, okay, what's my network going to look like? Is it Penn State people? Is it, you know, people in a similar space who I have outside connections to, maybe socially? You know, how am I going to reach the goals and the people who can help me reach those goals? So that's a big part of it. And, you know, it really, really helps to have, you know, gregarious personality, be able to just go out there and ask people for help, go out there and ask for advice, whatever it is. You know, you can't be afraid to cold call or cold email someone, but if you do, it really helps to be courteous, give them a good reason to respond, because, you know, if you cold email people and, you know, you have something for them, it's much better than, hey, here's my idea, here's my product, please help. So that's my take.
Yeah, to build upon what Roger was saying, I do think, like, for someone who's early stage or a first-time founder out here, it's really important to have traction on what you're working on or some sort of credibility, because there is such a high volume of startups out here and so many people interested in building something. In order to get the attention of customers, users, investors, etc., you really have to have something to point to that differentiates yourself. And so, yeah, I definitely think, like, that's part of it. And the other piece is just, like, having a project that you are actively working on. I found a lot of times when I was at Accenture and I was talking about, oh, I'm interested in startups and this and that, and I'm, like, looking for advice and looking to learn, etc., it is really hard to have a real conversation with someone unless I was specifically working on building a product, because it's just less tangible. And so I think people take you more seriously when you're all in, right? So, like, when you move out to the Valley, or when you quit your job or things like that, people all of a sudden start to take you more seriously than when you're just kind of on the side and you're saying, oh, well, I'm kind of playing around with the concept, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, I think it goes along the same lines with the credibility piece. You earn credibility when you take those risks. And so I think that's something that's really important in order to succeed out here.
I totally agree with what Drew said. I think I have a lot of friends out here who have been successful, and they do a lot of angel investing. And the most frequent complaint I hear from them is people are constantly pitching them with products that don't exist, and that gets really frustrating. And honestly, they frequently tell me that it feels like a waste of their time. Make a thing and then get feedback on it. It's very easy to say, oh, I have this idea, da-da-da-da-da, and then drag out these conversations. Here, I think there's really a maker's mentality that's dominant. So you can have, like, the best business plan in the world, but nobody cares. Like, yes, that'll come later. But if you first have an actual prototype, even if it's bad, that's going to get you a lot further than just kind of like, talking about some idea. So I think that, really getting out there and making something, even if it's very far from what your ultimate vision is going to be very helpful in getting people to, want to talk to you, want to help you out, and have actually meaningful conversations that can drive your idea forward.
I think being outside of Philadelphia, being outside of Silicon Valley, like in Philadelphia, like what Ariana talked about originally, of having those informal conversations, that you don't need to be as targeted and prepared for those types of conversations, and you may come across opportunities just through those kinds of conversations in a bar, at a coffee shop, at a party, and you're not going to have the chance to have those as much outside of Silicon Valley and perhaps Silicon Alley in New York, because it's just not around. The kinds of conversations that have to happen when you're outside of ground zero for startups are very targeted, very researched. You definitely have to cold call and network, but all of those cold calling and networking opportunities have to be extremely targeted, because you don't have the luxury of all of the, even though there's places to get together and network, it's not anything like ground zero for it. So when you don't have as clear an idea yet of what you want to do or an industry that you want to be in, I think that you limit a whole level, like maybe 80% of the networking opportunities that are available through the informal means when you're not surrounded by them.
I think that is everything on that question. We all talked, I think. I'm doing some tweeting. I'm multitasking here, so don't mind me looking at my other screen. But let's talk about what advantages does Silicon Valley offer to those in their early career who eventually want to start a company. So show of hands, who owns a company or who's co-founder of a company, and who is, that's down the road for you. So who owns a company? Or yes.
Currently or not currently?
All right. Well, I think this will be a great question then, because we have some people in different stages, and I'm looking out for some of our questions from our listeners as well on Twitter. So let's start with, what advantages does Silicon Valley offer to those in their early career who want to eventually start a company? All right.
I'll start off with this one. So I think the biggest thing that appeals to me about the mentality out here is that it's very flat. In a lot of other locations, seniority and age matters a lot. Out here, like, if you can do what you've been tasked with doing, awesome. It doesn't matter if you're 17 or 75. And that's something that I really value, because personally I've never been someone who likes to follow the rules very well. So being in an environment where I am allowed to take on more responsibility, or as much responsibility as I demonstrate that I can manage, is really valuable. And I think that that is something that you see out here more than anywhere else. So in terms of it being really valuable at the beginning of your career, I think that you can really advance a lot more quickly than you can in other work environments, in the sense that if you join an early stage startup and that ends up doing well, even if you're 22 when you join, let's say you're there for a couple of years and then the company ends up being the next Twilio or the next Uber or the next whatever, you can kind of springboard up to a level of experience and kind of career building that would take you maybe 10, 15 years to build if you followed a more traditional path. Even in the unfortunate and somewhat more likely scenario that your company doesn't end up being the next Uber, you can still get a ton of value out of that, because ultimately you're operating in a less structured environment, and so what that does is it builds, it's hard. It's really hard, but it builds a lot of valuable traits. So you become more independent. You become more able to manage yourself. You learn how to figure out problems that might not have a clear-cut solution. And you also, I think, grow up more from I would even say from an emotional maturity perspective, in the sense that startups are really a roller coaster. And so you have to learn to manage your own psychology, and having the ability to stay calm even when things are going poorly, or stay level-headed when they're going well, is something that will serve you very well from the beginning to the end of your career. And so it's great to get that framework in place right from the beginning.
Yeah, I can go off that a little bit. I really think that the biggest advantage of coming out here as someone who wants to have a company eventually is just the ability to learn. The experiences you can have, the opportunities you'll have to learn here are tremendous. For me, it's having a front row seat at a company that's starting out really small and growing into, ideally, a sports media juggernaut. That's the goal, and I'm getting to see kind of every stop along the way. What's it take to go to, from 5 employees to 10 employees, 10 employees to 20, business deals, partnerships, all that. You really get all of the information that, the decision makers have, and you get to see, and as someone who'd like to be making those calls myself one day, it's invaluable. There's really no topping seeing that in action and seeing how it works.
I can jump in. So I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this one, because when I left at Accenture, I was debating a lot between working full-time on a venture of my own versus coming out here and getting more experience. And I made the move to San Francisco before I had made that decision, and said, you know what, I just want to be in San Francisco. I know that's the spot for me right now. That's where I'm going to go. So there's a lot of things that I think the Valley offers future founders. The first is that there's a pay-it-forward mentality out here that I have not seen really anywhere else in the country. You move out and you can get coffee with people who are very successful, who you aren't really on their level, but there's just this mentality of pay it forward, because everyone who's made that or taken that path, they know at one point they didn't have anything to show for themselves either. And so people are very willing to give a hand and give advice and help you forward if you're willing to hustle and put in that effort in a way that I haven't seen in other major cities. So that's definitely a big one. And for example, what does that look like? For me, I moved out here, and Penn State alumni, several of them were just introducing me to companies left and right. And helping me network and helping me ask the right questions about, how should I prioritize the company I want to work at and the type of role I want and things like that. So that was really helpful for me. Echoing Ariana's point, I do think there's less judgment about age or experience levels. People out here care a lot more about execution, and if you're 18 or 22 or 25 or 30, no one cares if you can execute and build value. Granted, that matters a ton. That is what matters, is can you actually execute and can you demonstrate that traction. So that's a big one. I think in terms of working in the Valley, because there are so many startups, and this kind of echoes Roger's point, there's definitely an opportunity to wear a lot of hats. So when I was at Accenture, 40, 50,000 person company, my client was 50,000 plus. I was one part of a 20 person team and had a very limited scope in terms of what I was exposed to. Whereas in my current role here at SurveyMonkey, we're about 400 employees, and the part of the business I work in is about 60 to 70 employees, and we operate fairly independently from the rest of the company. And so on a day-to-day basis, I get to work with engineering, design, sales, marketing, and business ops. And I'm just kind of spread across all those different functions. And so I've been able to learn a lot because there are a lot of different situations I'm thrown into, because we don't have like subject matter experts in every single field, or because we're growing so quickly that they just have people take on new roles as new needs arise. In terms of like professional development and growth, I think that companies in the Bay Area are very incestuous, actually, in that a lot of people will move from one company to another as they're building their careers. So you'll see all the time, like at SurveyMonkey, for example, we have a ton of folks from Yahoo and Yammer and LinkedIn and a lot of different companies. And so as people move across different companies in the Valley within tech, they tend to bring friends and colleagues that they work well with and they have experience working with. And so there's a lot of opportunity both for you to individually move around, but then also to learn from others who've worked in multiple environments in the Valley. And then the last thing is building off of kind of the community and relationships piece that several of us have mentioned before. I think there's just an incredible opportunity to meet potential co-founders for the future, because there are just the volume of people is so high that have an interest in that. And like, I remember, like, it's like anywhere you go, you meet people who are interested in tech and interested in startups. Like, I go to church, and in my church group, I have friends who work at Apple and Facebook and Google and you name it, there's people at all these different companies. I go to play intramural sports, and there are folks who are starting their own companies left and right. I was on the BART, which is public transit out here, and I met one of the lead designers for Goodreads. It's just like you meet people everywhere you go. You almost can't get away from it as long as you're willing to be social, put a smile on your face, and start a conversation. And again, that goes back to the 1 in 10 sort of idea. But yeah, so I've definitely had a really positive experience here, and I think that all of these things are going to really set me up for success in the future. And actually, as I say that, one final point I'll make is I do think like building up roots in a certain area before you launch your company is a really good idea. I think for me to have moved out here and just said, okay, I'm just going to start a company right now, the only way for me to really have been successful doing that, if I really wanted to like build out a team and be a high growth company, would have been to go through an accelerator like Y Combinator or 500 Startups, where they offer that community from day one. For me to move out here and start getting experience before founding a company, I think is really important, because I am able to build those relationships, because every single person I work with is someone who I might work with in the future, or I might hire, or I might contract or partner with, et cetera, et cetera. And so to not have that foundation built would make it a lot more challenging. And Jamie, maybe you could speak to that in Philly. I imagine your network there has helped you quite a bit.
Going back to the industry specific, it's definitely the Penn State network that has helped us, and they aren't Philly based primarily. It's mostly the Penn State network and using that in New York in the media industry. So getting back to networking within the industry being important is, I think, a theme that you'll find anywhere.
I'll jump in here and ask for Jamie's expertise. So Jamie, you were the person who raised their hand about I currently own a company. So the original question we were talking about is what advantages does SV offer to those in their early career who eventually want to start a company? But maybe you could just talk from a person who has the experience of starting a company. What resources are important to harness wherever you are? What are some of the things that entrepreneurial minds should be thinking about?
I think there are things that were talked about here because they're relevant no matter where you are. And number one is harnessing the support of your friends and family, like unconditional support from your friends and family, because it is psychologically brutal to start a company. Roller Coaster puts it very nicely sometimes, being very honest with that. So the friends and family is super important. The network, an informal network, which is very difficult to build if you are not in a place with other people with startups, is very important. And there are opportunities to do that here, but not enough that takes away the isolation that you can feel when you're going through those really tough times, and your family and friends can help you only so much. But when you're surrounded by people who have gone through the same thing, that's really important to have around, is when you're starting a company and going through that. So I think it's everything that everybody said, and you just find ways to compensate when you don't have the informal network of people, you know, that you meet. And we've joined some groups in Philadelphia. Like, I'm a member of a CEO group through Ben Franklin Technology Partners. We got funding through them, and they have a lot of CEOs that get together every month, and we talk about it. It's an organized group. So having that reference group, super important, but it's a lot more deliberate and hard to cultivate it here.
Great. That's our last official question. I've got at least one question in on Twitter, but I wanted to ask if any of you want to talk about your current ideas. I know a couple of you said, hey, it's not time to start a company yet, I just got here. We've been talking around your companies, and Jamie shared a little bit. Do you want to share anything about your current endeavors that might help our conversation on Twitter? I think our listeners would be interested in that. Drew, do you want to start? I don't know.
Sure. So I'll start by just giving a little bit more color about what I'm doing at SurveyMonkey. So I work in a part of the business called SurveyMonkey Audience, and hopefully most of you guys are familiar with SurveyMonkey. I know students use our platform a ton, but you probably aren't as familiar with SurveyMonkey Audience, and that's probably because most of our customers are businesses and entrepreneurs, and what we do is we provide easy access to different types of people around the country. So if you said you wanted to get feedback on your survey from moms who use iPhones, or from people who live in San Francisco, or fill in the blank, like people who shop at Walmart, you can target all those things through our platform, and we have people signed up to take surveys because we donate to charity every time they do. And so we kind of play middleman, where we connect companies to people that they need feedback from as they're thinking about new marketing concepts, or how they're going to message their product, or how they're going to price it, or how people perceive their brand, and different things like that. So that's what we're working on, or I guess what I'm working on here at SurveyMonkey. In terms of what I'm working on the side, right now I haven't been putting too much effort into any one specific thing on the side. I think for the first 6 to 12 months in a job, it's really important to make sure you just really excel there, and so that's kind of been my focus to date. That being said, a side passion of mine is the personal development and career/life planning sort of space. And so I've played around with some ideas there in terms of how do you help people, how do you provide frameworks for people to make larger career and life decisions. And I think in our generation, there are so many people who struggle with FOMO or FOBO, fear of better options. And especially for college students, it's really hard to make that decision in terms of what do I want to do next, or what do I want to do with my life. And so what I've been working on the side, and what I'll probably be trying to build up over the next year or so, is an online community that helps people work through those life decisions. So not to say that I have it all figured out, but to say that I felt the need myself to have a specific framework or a way to help filter my decisions. And so I'm just working on building out some resources that can help people do those things.
Awesome. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this? If not, I have some Twitter questions. Anybody else want to share their project? I know we got a little bit of it. I'll let you jump back in a minute if you do. Let me ask you one of the Twitter questions. So let's see. I'm going to bring up the first one. So in moving to Silicon Valley, what are the startup costs? And also, H. Fennessy asks about supply chain and distribution options for, I'm guessing she means building your network. So do you guys want to talk about some of the startup costs, whether those are personal, Jamie mentioned family and friend support, or the true cost of sort of making that jump? And we'll have one more from Twitter coming up, and maybe a few more.
Okay, I can start off this one, seeing as I just did this a few months ago. I have it very top of mind. Honestly, I think those costs are kind of going to vary depending on how flexible you are, both in terms of personal costs and in terms of like startup costs. So one thing to consider is that obviously they're not kidding when they say that it's really expensive to be out here. Your rent's going to be steep, and I mean, I'm coming from Manhattan, so I'm used to expensive rents, but out here is still kind of makes you cringe when you think about it. So that's one thing that you need to factor in. At the same time, I think that those costs pay themselves back, but you do want to be cognizant of the fact that you will need some initial capital. How much of that capital you need, again, is really also a factor of or a result of your starting network. So if you're able to come out here and crash on a friend's couch for a bit, well, that's great. That'll save you a couple $1,000s in rent the first month. In terms of company, ask everybody. Do they have a little corner where you could put a desk for you and your co-founder? You know, you have to really be creative in terms of how you get access to certain things. So again, asking people is a really great way to go about it. So I would just say yes, you should factor in that you will have some pretty substantial starting costs, but ultimately I think those costs are definitely worth it.
Does anybody else want to weigh in? Looks like Drew.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just in terms of dollar signs, it's more expensive to start a company in San Francisco than anywhere else. And that, to Ariana's point, is because not just your personal rent is expensive, and like food and all these different things are expensive, but well, in part because of that, salaries are very, so hiring becomes more costly, and business space, like renting, becomes more costly as well. And so it's definitely it's a high cost, but that being said, the investors here recognize that, and so they are going to invest in such a way that gives you the ability to afford what you need, assuming you're able to prove your traction. And so, you know, if you're thinking about it in terms of, oh, you know, can I afford to? Let me put it this way: you don't really want to come to San Francisco without some kind of stream of capital infused into your company, unless you have a couch to sleep on. It's not the best place to bootstrap. I would say if you're doing something that's going to be solely online, just hustle for as long as you can and get traction before you move out here, because every day you spend here is very expensive. So yeah, and then on like the more personal side, for the pros and cons, definitely, moving away from friends and family is the biggest cost. I know for me, I didn't think it was going to be a big deal because I thought, oh well, I do a good job of keeping in touch over the phone or via text, and I'll be back a couple times a year to see people. But the 3-hour time difference honestly makes a huge, it wears on you a lot. I get into work around 8 o'clock in the morning, and I can't really talk to anyone back on the East Coast because they've all been at work for 3 hours. And then when I wrap up around 6, everyone back on the East Coast is, it's 9 o'clock for them. So my parents are getting ready for bed. So it's like your only chance to catch up with people is on the weekends oftentimes. And, you don't necessarily want to spend your weekends on the phone for 3 or 4 hours just saying hey to family. So it's definitely tough, and that's something to consider is, whether or not that's something you're willing to sacrifice, because it's definitely something that not everyone is willing to sacrifice, nor should they. So it's, you need to be able to prioritize.
Great. Thank you. I think I have a good one for maybe Jamie and Ariana. Not sure, Drew and Roger, if you guys were in NYC at all. But we have a question about Silicon Alley versus Silicon Valley. Let me make sure that I've got it here. All right. Silicon Valley versus Silicon Alley in New York City. What have you seen as pros and cons for seeing if the move to one is better?
I would go back to being locating in the industry that is relevant to what you're in. And if you have a startup that is in the media world or the financial service industry, that finding people who are in that industry, industry experts, investors, employees, it's all it could be more of a benefit to be in Silicon Alley because there are more of those financial service people in New York.
I agree with what Jamie said in terms of industries. The other thing I think you need to consider is so 2 things. Number 1, your personal network. So even though I had, I lived in Italy until I started at Penn State, but even though I've been on the East Coast for my entire working career until now, I actually had a much stronger network in tech out here, actually through a lot of Penn State and Schreier alums as well, but who have since moved out here. But so you need to consider where it makes the most sense for you to be based on who you know in each of those places and how important those connections are going to be to your business. The other thing I would recommend considering is the stage of your company. So if you're looking to fundraise, what I've experienced personally when I was fundraising and what I've seen through friends' experiences as well is that investors out here will be more willing to take a chance on an idea that might be a little bit unconventional. So if you're if you're building something that's not necessarily in a very traditional industry or is really pushing boundaries in a substantial way, you may find that you have a more difficult time fundraising on the East Coast. I think investors out here are more, I have this life philosophy that's, I call it go big or go homeless. And I think that a lot of investors out here kind of share that. They expect that they're going to invest in a lot of crazy ideas, most of which are going to go nowhere, and then some of which are going to be extremely successful. Like Twitter sounds like such a stupid idea if you hear it the first time, and then it turns out it's a massively successful company. And so investors out here, I think, are more open to hearing that kind of proposal. So again, if you're looking to raise either pre-traction or in an industry that's not, that's not really very conventional, or with an idea that's not very conventional, then I would suggest coming out here.
And I don't have anything that different to add, having never lived in New York. I can't color too much on that, but I would say you don't have to limit yourself to Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley either. There are other startup hubs that are booming. Boulder, Austin, Boston, and even DC is starting to pick up, and Philadelphia.
Chicago too.
Yeah, Chicago. And even a city like Philadelphia, they have some level of support there. So while it might not be, it might not have the reputation or reach that some of the larger ones would have, don't necessarily limit yourself.
Thanks, Drew. I got a great question here on Twitter. Let me pull it up. All right, here's the question. Is the move to Silicon Valley worth it for giant corporations as well instead of just the startups?
They're already here. If you're looking at tech, I mean, who's not here? Facebook's here, Google's here, Apple's here. Like, that's kind of the place to be for sure. For other industries, probably not. I mean, if you look at something like, when I was at Facebook, I was working on the Coca-Cola account, so I was in Atlanta all the time. And for them, they need huge amounts of space. They need, a place that's more centrally located and not on one side of the country. So there are other concerns. If you have a business where it's important to have a lot of manufacturing plants nearby, then no, it doesn't make sense to be out here because the cost of that space and that land and those resources is going to be massive. If you're a tech company, I mean, again, there are very few that don't already have headquarters out here, and I think there's, it's not like they haven't thought it through. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a good reason to be out here, even if you are a bigger company. And part of that is related to talent. So if this is where, the engineers and the designers and the really business savvy people are flocking to, then of course you want to be here because it'll be a lot easier for you to recruit them to a place that's more desirable because, if you're in the middle of nothingness, that's probably not going to attract a lot of smart, ambitious recent grads. So somewhere like this is going to be a much better place for recruiting those kinds of people and then keeping that talent for a little bit longer than you might be able to in, I don't know, Omaha or something.
Great, I'm going to jump in. Roger, if you want to weigh in this, let me, since it's just at 4 o'clock, I want to give all of our participants the attendance code. The attendance code for this event is LMD, as in Larry, Mary, and Dave, LMD. So if you're listening to this for class credit, etc., LMD. But I'll let Roger answer this question, and I know some of our participants might have to sign off at 4 o'clock. That's okay, but I think we'll finish answering the Twitter questions we get in. For those of you who can stay a few minutes longer, I expect maybe 10 or so more minutes since we did get started a little bit late. So Roger, if you want to talk a little bit about that, corporations versus startups.
Else, real speaking, say, paid employee here, it's something kind of for most companies, bring all these Cisco where rent is astronomical, will have some place in, astronomical.
Great. I think we're going to go on to the next question. We have a Twitter user who asks, do you have any input or thoughts about biomedical startups?
Not particularly. I don't have a lot of exposure to biotech. I do know that Boston is probably the biggest hub for biotech startups, and then San Francisco is probably number 2, or they're probably number 1 and number 2. But me personally, I haven't really worked a whole lot or been exposed to that at all.
I think it's growing very quickly. I think with Google X and their stuff going on down there, it's going to be a very rapidly growing area in the next, probably, stuff like wearable transitions to stuff like, I mean, the extension of Google Glass or wherever that goes next. It's going to be very, body mods, all that kind of science fiction stuff. That's actually what they're looking into at Google right now. A lot of the other, exploratory experiment or experimental stuff going on at Genentech or those places. And I think, but if
Anybody else want to add to that topic?
I don't really, yeah, I can't claim much experience or expertise in that field. But I did see that today, what is that company? It's really big. They announced basically that it's a company, it's the founder is a young woman, she's I think 30, and she's been working on this company since she was a student at Stanford. Basically, now at Walgreens you can do blood tests without actually pricking your skin, and this is a pretty important innovation in the sense that making this more broadly available is going to have pretty widespread applications and implications in terms of people being able to test themselves for any kind of medical issue that's coming up and would be visible through their blood. So again, not a field I have a lot of experience in, but this is definitely something that's happening out here as well, despite the fact that a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies aren't here. I think there's more of a tech-based approach out here for, obviously. So it's maybe less in terms of traditional pharmaceuticals, but more around new devices that can track different vital signs, that can help people manage their own health more effectively, which I think is an interesting trend.
Great. I'm asking for final questions on Twitter right now, but I'm going to take a couple minutes. If I could ask each of you, I think we'll start with Jamie since we haven't talked with Jamie yet. What are some, if you were talking to a student, if you were sitting right here in Penn State, and I'd like to point out how different my background is here at the old education institution from your backgrounds. So if you were here on campus in our libraries and stacks of books, what would you tell a student? What would you tell a student about his or her desire to take his idea and go with it wherever it is? What could make that student successful? And that student's from Penn State. So what about Penn State especially can they use? What would you tell them?
I would tell them, one, to know your passion and know why you're pursuing it. Because when things get difficult and you're sacrificing, investing everything, your blood, sweat, tears, your education, and working really hard, you have to know why you're doing it. I can't I can't emphasize that enough. The second is to use your Penn State network, because the Penn State network has been responsible for helping us to develop our strategy, to get our advisors, to get funding, to get our first hire that we got from IST, and to get my business partner. And everybody has very diverse backgrounds geographically and skill set wise, but they all came from Penn State. So if there are the two pieces of advice, it's know your passion and why, and use Penn State no matter where you go. Because I'm so proud of being associated with the school, and especially the Shire Honors College, because the way that people have treated me and what they've done for me, what we do for each other, just makes me really proud to be part of the school. So I haven't found anyone who has not been like at the level of wonderfulness that I'm describing.
Tweeting that one out. All right, who's up next?
I would say take advantage of the disposable time you have to get your feet wet with learning entrepreneurial principles, and not like studying and reading books and attending events, but actually try and build something. You know, like Jamie said, pick your passion, find a problem that excites you, and just try and build something. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it sucks. What matters is that you're going to learn more from experience than you would from trying to read and learn, because experience is the best teacher. So that's, to me, that's the biggest benefit of being a student. You have so much time on your hands because you only spend 15, 20 hours in class in a given week. So take advantage of that. And you have tons and tons of people all around you with diverse skill sets and interests that you can test your ideas with and get feedback from. So definitely just take advantage of what the school has to offer.
All right. Roger?
For me, it's all about, try things. When I graduated, I probably spent about 4 months just trying to think about what I wanted to do, what would be the perfect start for me. And I ended up just, not doing that and trying something else. And even though that wasn't perfect for me, it wasn't what I wanted to do, it taught me that, and I learned that, okay, maybe that's not where I want to go. I don't want to work in real estate. But through that, being out here in Silicon Valley, I found what was perfect for me, which was working in a sports media startup. And that whole process really just taught me, you've got to try it. You've got to, make the jump, even if you don't know where you're going to land. It's worth it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the most important thing is to just, I think this is a mentality that you really see in action out here, but I think it applies to wherever you are, is just try things and experiment. And obviously, there's this maxim that, oh, failure is great. No, failure sucks. Nobody likes failing. But if you don't do it, you are very likely not going to be successful. And ultimately, until you try things, you won't know if they work or not. So I think sometimes you just have to go for it.
All right, do we have any last thoughts? Anything you haven't shared? Anything you think you need to tell our listeners, students here, or anybody else before we head out?
I would just synthesize what everybody just said, because it's all the same idea. If you know your passion, you got to try stuff in that area, and you should do it now, because Drew's absolutely right. You have time, and it's a low risk, low cost to try things now. So if you put together what everyone just said, and you take advantage of your time right now, that's the best advice that I think comes from the collective panel.
The only thing I would add is feel free to reach out if you have other questions. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter or whatever.
Yep, same here. Happy to help.
Yeah, me too.
Likewise.
Great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for logging in. You can find a lot of this conversation on Twitter at #MoveToSV, underneath at GEW Penn State or at Penn State Honors. We've quoted some things. Feel free to continue that conversation there. The Twitter handles for all four of these great panelists, thank you so very much for your expertise, are in those tweets. I made sure to get one out about each of them. This is recorded, so we can rewatch our lovely videos of ourselves over and over again, panelists. And those who logged in or didn't see the whole thing or would like to share it with their friends will be able to do so. I'll make sure that we get that up on the Schreyer Honors College social media sites, and that it's on the GEW website, and then it keeps being available via Twitter. So thank you so much, everybody, for your expertise. I think that the advice that you gave here is really invaluable. I know that our students appreciate it, and I'm excited that we got to have this time together. So thanks so much for your time, everybody.
Yep, thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks for
having
organizing,
us. Good
Yes.
luck, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. By the way, it's 11 degrees in Happy Valley tonight, so enjoy the warmth.
We will. Take care.